In your debate with Bart Ehrman on Did Jesus Exist, you said all the letters of Paul are forgeries. Can you comment on that and expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that the Dutch radical school of critics with W.C. van Manen and various others, Bruno Bauer, but especially van Manen, he knew that there were a handful of scholars that dismissed all of the so-called Pauline epistles as forgery, and he thought, well, this is absurd, and I'm going to prove it. And you know what I'm going to say next, he wound up getting convinced. This son of a gun, I never thought of this. And he points out how there are clashing doctrines between the Pauline epistles and even within them. Like if you look at Romans 9 through 11 about God's plan for Israel, there seem to be 3 different treatises here arguing different things. If you look at what 1 Corinthians says about women prophesying and speaking in public, there's 2 diametrically opposed positions there. Same letter, should Christians eat meat offered previously to idols, then sold to the marketplace and you buy it there? Should you risk eating that, or does it make you an idolater? There are 2 diametrically opposed arguments, one right after the other. There's pro and anti-Gnostic material, cheek by jowl. Was this guy a multiple personality? Or isn't it more natural to say that Paulinists of various stripes were continually putting their views into these manuscripts as they circulated it? You're witnessing debates within the Pauline movement. And what was the Pauline movement? We take too literally the supposed audience of these epistles, the saints that are in Corinth and all that. There's no real record except for the epistles, that there were any such churches. The first Paulinists we know of, the first ones to collect and comment on his epistles, were the Marcionites and various Gnostic groups who held Paul as their founder. Well, I think that, and there's other things, Paul, quote unquote, referring to the traditions I delivered to you. What, Paul started this church a few years ago, and now there are venerable traditions that he handed on? There are retrospective statements as to his work now complete, as opposed to that of Apollos and Cephas and all that. In Romans, the idea that God has, and 1 Thessalonians, God has washed his hands of Israel once and for all. How would Paul have even been able to think that way just a few years after it started? This presupposes the big split between the two that couldn't have happened in his lifetime. And what is it that would have convinced him that the Jews have been judged? The fall of Jerusalem, which is supposedly after his death. And one thing after another, F.C. Bauer had already shown that all but 4 of the epistles had to be apocryphal, and van Manen and the others said you apply the same criteria to all of them and you're going to see that there are no more genuine Pauline materials in the canon than there are Petrine materials. You know, there's the 2 letters supposedly by Peter. Well, there's a truckload of other Petrine apocrypha. Apocalypse of Peter, Gospel of Peter, the Journeyings of Peter, the Preachings of Peter, and so on and so on. Nobody thinks that Peter wrote all this stuff, but he was a big name, and van Manen said it looks like the same thing was true of Paul. So, and one last thing, when you look at commentaries on the epistles written from a traditional standpoint, my teacher Darrell Dowdy pointed this out, he says the commentaries are almost all taken up with harmonizations, trying to say, now if Paul wrote this chapter and then this chapter, what could his train of thought have been? How would this square with this? It's all just harmonization. It presupposes a mass of contradictions, and the challenge is to make some sense out of them. It wouldn't be that way, and plus people didn't write letters of that length. They wrote fictitious letters that were treatises. And that already is removing it from the idea that Paul's just writing letters to his converts. So there's a bunch of arguments that now make me think another view that I once thought was insane, that there are no authentic Pauline epistles.
So,
in white coats.